Hello, and welcome to this week's Stories to Go to Sleep To. Before we get into today's stories, I will mention viewer listener discretion is advised. There will be a lot of talk about torture, death, blood, and gore. If you do find any of this distressing, I suggest you cease listening or watching now. There will also be several warnings throughout as I get into more detailed parts. So, let's begin. We're talking about Countess Elizabeth Báthory, and I hope I pronounced that right, or commonly known as Elizabeth Báthory. The name may ring a bell. She's well known as a Hungarian serial killer who bathed in the blood of young female virgins. So before we get well into it, get comfy, have a drink ready, relax, and listen. There must have been some truth to this, as the Guinness World Records has labelled Elizabeth as the most prolific female murderer in history. And this is a small part of the Guinness World Records website, but it had to say, and this is a direct quote, so the most prolific female murderer and the most prolific murderer of the Western world was Elizabeth Báthory, who practiced vampirism on girls and young women. She is alleged to have killed more than 600 virgins in order to drink their blood and bathe in it, ostensibly preserve their youth. End quote. Elizabeth has that much notoriety around her that the Swedish band Ghost wrote a song called Elizabeth about her. There's also numerous films that she inspired and stories as well throughout the years. I mean, it's even been said that maybe Bram Stoker based Dracula on her and not Vlad the Impaler. You know, who knows? Come from the same area of the world. So how did she become to be? And was all that we've heard or think we know true? Here's the story I've found. I've used multiple websites and podcasts to get this information. So let's get into this. Countess Elizabeth Báthory was born in Hungary on 7th of August 1560. Elizabeth's family had some European pedigree to them. Elizabeth's uncle, Stephen Báthory, was King of Poland. I think the fact that Elizabeth's family controlled Transylvania does add to that vampiric nature of her stories and that mystery, because we do all associate Transylvania, as well as being absolutely beautiful, with Dracula or with vampires, with that lore and mythology. Elizabeth was raised in Esch, and I apologise if I butchered that name. I will make a full apology now. There's a lot of Hungarian and Slovakian names in this. I'm not the best at pronouncing names. I have tried, but I do apologise. I do not mean to insult anybody with my pronunciation. So, you know, she was born at Esch, and that's in Hungary, and it's her family's castle. Elizabeth, as you can possibly tell with having a castle, came from wealth and a noble family. Due to this, she had a relatively good education, so she learned Hungarian as you'd expect, but also Latin, German and Greek, which were some of the staple languages of the 1500s. Elizabeth was also raised Calvinistic Protestant. I'm not going to go into that. I just felt it was worth mentioning that she did have a religious upbringing. Elizabeth wasn't an only child and had several siblings, one of which served as Judge Royal of Hungary. His name was Stephen Báthory. So again, that namesake from her uncle to her brother and keeping that lineage going, it's all there. I feel this is where some of the vampiric stories begin, and possibly Elizabeth's potential obsession with blood. I will apologise, my voice is going. Hopefully it will last the remainder of this or even come back. So Elizabeth, as a child, is said to have had multiple seizures, which may have been caused by epilepsy. Epilepsy wasn't known then, or given the name that we know today. Some of the treatments for epilepsy in the 1500s, or as it was known as falling sickness, were rubbing the blood of a non-sufferer on the lips of the affected. Now that screams to me all kinds of wrong, from disease and contamination, but that's what they did in the 1500s, and you can see where, you know, it might have, some science might be there, but obviously we wouldn't have that today. Elizabeth, who was considered well educated, as we've previously mentioned, was also considered beautiful as well, so she was the full package. At 11, became engaged to Count Elizabeth. Now I will just refer to him as the Count from now on, again to save that butchering of his name. Just me trying to be a bit more respectful. I found several sources that say before Elizabeth turned 13 and married the Count, that she did become pregnant with a peasant's child. That must have been a scandal. The sources go on to say that the child was taken to Wallachai to be raised by a local woman who the Báthory family trusted. She was given financial compensation for doing this, it was said. This is all speculative, as the information only came to light after Elizabeth's death. So given the time period, I could see it being easy just to dispose of an unwanted child. And given what Elizabeth later becomes known for, I found this quite welcoming to hear that the supposed child was taken care of. So it tells me that she wasn't brought up around a lot of brutality. Now there was wars going on in the area, and her family did have like a dungeon. But it doesn't necessarily mean she was fully around it all the time. At the age of 15, on May the 8th, 1575, Elizabeth married the Count. Now, I didn't mention before, but I'm guessing you all know that he was a member of another noble and powerful Hungarian family, and this marriage was due to political reasons and meant more land was gained for the families, so they had more control. As was everything back then, it was all transactional, all to gain power, all to gain influence. As previously said, the Count was from nobility. I do feel we need a little insight into him, as surely he knew what was allegedly going on. He's got to have known. Or was there a reason he didn't know? So the Count was a soldier and spent many years away fighting off the Ottoman Turks. So maybe he wasn't fully aware what was going on because he wasn't around. So Elizabeth and the Count spent most of their marriage separated. Speculation is that the Count trained Elizabeth in ways and techniques of torture when they were together. How romantic. Hey, love, I'm back from war, but shall we go torture a few peasants for fun? I mean, it's one way to bond over a marriage. I'm not sure if I'd agree to do that. That's what it said. Now, Elizabeth and the Count were married. They moved to Castle Chekete, and I think I've butchered that, which was a wedding gift from the Nadde family. 10 years after their marriage, in 1585, Elizabeth had the first of 5 children: Anna, Osoya, Katalin, Andras, and Paul. Only 3 of Elizabeth's children survived past being infant. The infant mortality rate was high in the 1500s and it stayed high for a while, but over 50% of your children surviving was actually pretty good, and again this is due to nobility having the money for better access to healthcare, to better treatment, better food all round. So the 3 children, Anna, Osoya, and Paul, were raised by a governess. And this was just like what Elizabeth was raised with. She was raised by a governess, and no doubt the Count may have been as well. And all of her children went on to marry into prominent families of the time. So they were keeping that lineage, keeping that bloodline going. So we're going to go a little bit back in time. So I'm going to go 3 years into Elizabeth's marriage, so 1578, and the Count became chief commander of the Hungarian troops. And whilst Elizabeth's husband was away, she took care of the management of her husband's business affairs and the multiple estates they had. She was basically acting on her husband's behalf. I did feel this important to mention, as it demonstrates power that Elizabeth wielded as a woman in the 15 to 1600s. Women didn't have a lot of power then. But obviously Elizabeth had that authority and the respect from the people around her. I'm guessing at that point in time, she was trusted. But more did happen locally around this time, but I feel it's not overly relevant to Elizabeth's story. There was quite a lot. There was literally living near the border of a couple of war zones, basically. But it didn't seem to impact on what Elizabeth was doing, because there was no mention of her having prisoners or anything. It was literally just servants. So I'll let you research that in your own time. From 1601, so going back to that timeline, it said that the Count started becoming unwell. He started with debilitating pain in his legs and this mystery illness. And I say mystery illness not as in there's a mystery surrounding it, but as more they didn't know what this illness was. It was just a mystery to them all. They didn't know why, and Count never fully recovered, and he became permanently disabled by 1603. So within 2 years of being able, he wasn't. The Count, knowing he was unwell, entrusted Georgi Teruza, I will just be calling him Teruza from now on, who was the Palatine of Hungary, to oversee his wife and his heirs. So knowing he was unwell, he got someone else to make sure everything was running smoothly. And now, side note, Palatine is a high-level official, has authority granted to him, which is higher in his station. And now, Cruiser, he acted on behalf of the sovereignty of the time. So he would go in lieu of the king to places and basically do the king's will. Count passed away on the 4th of January 1604 at the age of 48. And at this time he had been married to Elizabeth for 29 years. Around this time, rumours of Elizabeth's mistreatment spread somewhat, and it said the rumours started around, I think it was 1602 and carried on to 1606. And so it's while her husband was ill, and maybe, this is where the theory that it was all political comes in. Maybe, the other gentry who wanted the estate saw that the Count was ill and could seize it from under him. These things did happen. It got to the point where a Lutheran minister named Esteban Magyari made complaints against Elizabeth, and he was very vocal in his complaints and very bold, and he made these complaints in the court of Vienna and publicly. Basically anyone who'd listen, he'd say she's mistreating, torturing her staff. And we're going to go back a little bit into what some of these complaints are. And some of these details do come from testimonies which were taken. And we'll get into more details about testimonies later. So, warning, it's not very gory, but there is mention of torture in this next section. It was said that Elizabeth's initial victims were young girls aged between 10 and 14 years old, who were lured into service at the castle by offers of a well-paid job. Now back then it was very hard to get a well-paid job, and to have nobility and the wealthy offering these positions, it must have seemed like a dream. If these young girls didn't die at the hands of Elizabeth, they were tortured. And that's the only way I can put it. If she didn't outright kill them, they were tortured. Going into a little detail here again, not gory as I said. These young girls got burnt on their hands, severe beatings, they froze or were starved to death. Excuse me. And it was said there was biting of their flesh off random parts of their body. And this led to Elizabeth being suspected of cannibalism. Some of the girls were even covered in honey and live ants. It was horrific. I mean, I don't like ants crawling on me at the best of time, but to be covered in sticky honey hurts the ants to come and eat. Not nice. Leave that to your own imaginations. Elizabeth may have also abducted young girls as well. Well, not Elizabeth directly, but a few of her servants. Once it appeared that Elizabeth was running out of servants, and this was due to rumours, because no matter how much money, you don't want to go there and die. It said she began to kill the daughters of lesser gentry. So, when peasants were reporting their daughters were missing, died, the authorities took no action. They didn't pay no mind when the lesser gentry, their daughters were going missing, and the authorities took notice. So this is when the uproar started, when the gentry daughters went missing. But it did take until they go missing to, as I said previously, people to take notice. And if they'd only taken notice when the peasants were going missing, maybe they could have stopped most of this and investigated beforehand. But hey ho, is what it is. It's the 1600s. But it is amazing to me that when you have money, I mean, even nowadays, money talks, money gets you places. They only started paying attention to those that had money. But how did she get the gentry daughters into her castle? It's one big thing. Well, she had a gynoeceum. And gynoeceum is part of the house where Elizabeth would teach the lesser gentry's daughters about courtly etiquette. Comes from the Roman Empire. And the name, there is some story to it. I'm not going to go into it. But she, you know, these lesser gentry daughters must have seen this as a fantastic opportunity to learn this courtly etiquette, to not evaluate, that's the wrong word. To gain that higher status, I can't think of the word right now. To gain that status in the court. Elevate. There we go. It came to me. Now, I did find sources that say Elizabeth began killing in 1590. So this is 14 years before the Count passed away. Surely he must have known something was going on or was in on it. Maybe it was happy wife, happy life. He turned a blind eye. The complaints kept mounting. Witnesses came forward to say that they had seen mutilated dead bodies buried in graveyards and unmarked locations. Now, just as I have this morbid curiosity, won't lie, did these witnesses literally stand by and watch this happen and not report it? Did they go and pick them up, or can they see through the ground to know? Either way, they knew about it and didn't report it afterwards. And again, this is the influence Elizabeth had other people. So, Matthias II, who's then the King of Hungary, assigned Russo, and we've already met him. He was the guy who was already looking after Elizabeth and the children. So again, he was this Palatine of Hungary. The king assigned him to investigate the horrid claims, and this was back in 1610. So it took 4 years from these rumours circulating to get investigated. Druso did have 2 helpers. He had Andreas Peresgri, I think that's how you pronounce it, and Moses Shizaki. Again, probably butchered them, I do apologise. And they was acting as the nurturers on this. They started gathering the evidence in 1610. Prior to this, though, Elizabeth was arrested on December the 30th, 1609, with her accomplices, so those trusted servants. One source reports that Druso showed up when Elizabeth was in the middle of torturing her victim. I've seen conflicting reports on this. That was just one source. Multiple sources do say that Elizabeth was actually in the middle of eating her dinner when he showed up, but he did see evidence of torture victims and mistreatment going on. So there's some truth there, not full truth. And Elizabeth at that point was confined to her castle. So it's nice to have, you know, that high status, because I can guarantee her servants weren't confined to that castle. Druso and his helpers got to work quickly, and by October of that year in 1610, they had 52 witness statements, which rose to over 300 statements by 1611. They got those quickly. Now the picture I have on screen is from Amy's crypt. giving them credit for this one. I just felt it displayed what I was reading the best. So they had depositions from court officials who had previously claimed to have seen Elizabeth torture and kill young girls. They also exposed that Elizabeth just didn't kill at her home castle, but at Sava, Vienna and Bratislava. Basically, everywhere she and the family owned. It's also found that Elizabeth had several people who supplied her with victims by force or deception. From all the statements that Trousseau gathered, he determined through these depositions that Elizabeth had killed more than 600 young women. We also got to remember that a lot of these witness statements were coerced by torture. So how true are all of them? There is the statements there, it is sworn fact, but are they true or not? I think it's about time that we did delve into some of the statements now, mentioning them. And I was able to find some. These are from secondary sources. I couldn't find the originals. They are in a book, and I think the book's in French. So I will warn everyone, this is where it does get a bit more graphic in detail with the gore. You know, if you want to carry on, it is absolutely at your discretion. So this is one account from an employee who worked for Elizabeth for 16 years. And his name is Fitzker. Now, Fitzker was a dwarf, and it was claimed he'd been taken by force to work for Elizabeth. A little bit of background information from about the 1400s onwards to about the 1700s. These people who were different, gentlest way of putting it, were often acquired by courts and the gentry as a spectacle. Basically say, come to my court and you can see this. Which is appalling, for it did carry on for an awful long time. Anyway, I digress. Let's get back into it. So it's said that Fitzker wasn't sure how many girls he helped Elizabeth to kill. He did say 5 were buried in holes, 2 in a church and 2 in a garden. He went on. He confirmed that the girls had been lured with promises of employment in the castle. And we heard this earlier on. So I'm guessing there was some of this luring going on, and you know, there's quite a lot of information to base that. Now, if the girls didn't come willingly, he said they were beaten unconscious and carried off. So you had one choice. You was going to end up in the castle, yay or nay, whether you went there willingly or dragged. Women from the village would often provide gifts. Women from the village would often be provided with small or money during these young girls. So I'm guessing this is where they may have kept it quiet. You're getting monetary gain. It's very transactional. Back when you needed money because you was a peasant, I'm guessing it would have been a survival thing going in. Fitzker went on to say these girls at the castle were bound and stabbed with items that included needles and scissors, and the girls had been chosen for their youth and beauty. So maybe this is where, like, the story of Elizabeth bathing in the blood to stay beautiful came from. Now, this is a direct quote from Testimony of the Torturer's website. Very good. Check it out. So here we go. When asked about the type of torture used, he said, as recorded by Penrose, they tied the hands and arms very tightly with Viennese cord. They were beaten to death until the whole body was black as charcoal and their skin was red and torn. One girl suffered more than 200 blows before dying. Barker, another accomplice and procurer, cut their fingers one by one with shears and then slit the veins with scissors. End quote. He just go into a bit of detail, and it's horrific if you think about it's just horrible. Iona Joe admitted that she had killed around 50 girls using red hot pokers, shoving them up girls' mouths and up their noses. That must have been horrific. So there's another quote. The mistress herself, she testified, had placed her fingers into the mouth of one girl and pulled hard until the side split open. She had also stabbed them all over with needles, making them bleed, or had torn apart their flesh with sharp pincers. She liked to slit open the skin between the fingers. End quote. And Iona does go on and continued that even when Elizabeth was ill, she would have had girls brought to her room so she could bite and slap them. I mean, even when ill and you continue in this, there's something not right there. It said that Elizabeth sometimes bit them until they died and then made her male servants eat the flesh. So here's another quote. Countess might place oiled paper between a girl's legs and set it on fire, or use candles to burn them. There was often so much blood from cutting the girls in strategic spots that cinders were placed around the Countess's bed to absorb it. Where they buried the bodies in secret places, they chanted over them. End quote. It is also said that Elizabeth's family were into Satanism and also witchcraft and chanted and did spells. A lot of that I found was all speculatory. There was not much meat to the bones in that sense. Speculation that a lot of the testimonies were falsified so other prominent political figures could gain control of Elizabeth's vast estate. And again, how much of this is true, how much is this being coerced and is made worse than it actually was. So I'm using a direct quote from the website again, which could be used as evidence in this case. I'm going to read it out then. You can make up your own mind why you think it would be evident. So, the third accused accomplice added that the Countess liked to apply a red hot iron to the soles of the girls' feet, and another witness said that she had seen 4 girls bound in shrouds, barely alive but unable to move. Yet another claimed she had seen the devil himself sitting on Countess Báthory's lap, and that she had sexual relations with him, completely under his spell. This was due in part to his impressive male organ. Only one servant refused to testify against her mistress, and for that, says Codrescu, her eyes were pulled out and her breasts removed before she was ultimately burned at the stake. End quote. And again, this statement not only can be disproved, also mentions that if you didn't testify, you were going to be tortured and killed. So better to say something and maybe just be tortured a bit than tortured and killed. So now we've gone through some of the testimonies, we're going to come back to the timeline. In September 1610, Elizabeth wrote a will. And I guess she was aware that things were not going smoothly and she was being investigated. So it was all around this time. And she could be executed for the murders. I mean, it's highly unlikely because of her wealth and status, but she still could be. I guess that played on her mind. But also the fact her vast estate that she built with her husband could just be portioned out to other gentry of the area. So, in this will, Elizabeth left all current and future inheritance possessions to her children. Very wise. So she made sure that before she got convicted of anything, it was down in writing. No one could challenge that. In December 1610, she signed arrangements to distribute all of her lands, estates and possessions amongst her children. That was all done, which is fantastic. 2 trials were held after Elizabeth was arrested. The first was held on the 2nd of January 1611 and the second on the 7th of January. Now, Elizabeth herself, although she was arrested and convicted, she was never actually put on trial for this. Her servants were. So 3 of her servants were accused with her and they were found guilty and promptly executed. And it said it was quite swift. There wasn't a long time waiting for this to happen. It's been said that the trials grew more gruesome day by day, and I've given you a snapshot of that. And if there's 300 testimonies, the people are going to embellish a saying. You know, it's going to get worse. Elizabeth and her servants were found guilty of 80 counts of murder. Now, this was based on how many skeletons and body parts there were found. So, I'm happy to hear that through this investigation, obviously there wasn't the full 600, it was what they could find. So maybe that count was a lot lower. There's an unsubstantiated claim there. A handwritten notebook of Elizabeth's detailed more than 650 female names. These also include the, gruesome details in there. Now it is unsubstantiated and they didn't use it as evidence. I'm guessing they didn't find it overly credible. Druso did write a letter to King Matthias on the 25th of January 1611, so this is after the trials had taken place, and he mentioned that he had detained Elizabeth and she was confined to her castle. There was writing there that says Elizabeth was walled up, so basically she only had one room, her chamber. Basically, she could go in, but it was more like she was kept in the house arrest and had the full reign of the castle, just couldn't leave it. And Elizabeth was kept there until her death on the 21st of August 1614. There isn't much detail, but I feel there's a slight mystery surrounding Elizabeth's death, and why would, in everything I've researched, they mention this if there wasn't? So the night before her death, Elizabeth complained to her bodyguard that her hands felt cold, and it was said the bodyguard replied, "It's nothing, mistress, just go lie down." And Elizabeth never woke up again. She died in her sleep. I was expecting to see mention of Elizabeth bathing in blood of young victims in the statements, and I did find it mentioned, but it wasn't how I expected. And the first mention I can find about Elizabeth bathing in the blood of virgins to recapture her youth from over 100 years after her death. And I'm guessing, and again, there's the speculation there, and it's wrote in these books, that this was an embellishment and it was all an invention just to further that folklore, because at this time Elizabeth was prominent, she was there in folklore and legend, just to further, this gruesome tale. I'm going to finish here. There's more history explaining the theories, about how most of this could have been made up. But you can research this in your own time, because there's absolutely loads spanning different languages. And I'd be here for days. I don't think you want to listen to me ramble on for days. If you've made it this far, as always, thank you so much for staying with me and listening, and I hope you enjoyed this crime true story. We do appreciate it, Dead Chatty, if you can like, follow, subscribe our social media, would be absolutely amazing. So from me, good night.